Bettina Korek, Chief Executive of Serpentine. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to Hervé Télémaque Double Language. Following the major exhibition, A Hopscotch of the Mind, at Serpentine and now at the Aspen Art Museum, this special live-streamed program celebrates the life and work of Haitian artist Hervé Télémaque. Double Language invites world-renowned artists, thinkers, and writers to respond to Télémaque's rich visual language and explore how his practice, which spanned many decades, continues to influence the role of language and literature and art today. We'll be hearing from an extraordinary group of contributors whose practice intersects with Télémaque's work in many inspiring ways. Double Language also features a previously unseen interview between Télémaque and Ulrich Obrist, artistic director of Serpentine. Ever since Ulrich's first encounter with the artist in the 1990s, Serpentine has followed his career closely. We were thrilled to be able to present audiences in London and Aspen an opportunity to see the work of this remarkable artist firsthand, which is with his first major exhibitions in the UK and US, presenting works from the late 1950s until present day. A Hopscotch of the Mind opened at Serpentine in winter 21 and is currently on view at the Aspen Art Museum until March 26, 2023. We're so grateful to Aspen Art Museum and director Nicola Lees for their incredible collaboration and for our friendship over many years. This exhibition is part of Serpentine's ongoing commitment to exhibiting pioneering artists who are further in their careers but deserve wider recognition. This mission has come to life in other recent solo exhibitions of artists Rose Wiley, Lucida Hurtado, Faith Ringgold, James Barner, Barbara Chase Rabu, and Kamala Ibrahim Ishaq. We're enormously grateful to Hervé Télémaque for his energy and dedication, as well as to his daughter, Elodie Ann Télémaque, and collaborator, Florence Half-Robel, for their knowledge and support. The realization of this exhibition depended on the generosity and support of all the lenders, as well as our supporting partners, Hublot and City, and members of the exhibition circle, Paul Coulon, Catherine Pettigat, Rabouin Moussan Gallery, and Fluxus and Chanel. As ever, we express our continued appreciation to Bloomberg Philanthropies for their ongoing support, including the Bloomberg Connects digital guide. The Council of the Serpentine is an extraordinary group of patrons who we always thank, as well as our incredible Innovation Circle, America's Foundation, Asia Council, patrons, and future contemporaries. Final thanks to ACOM, Weil, and Galloglass. And we're so happy that you tuned in, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ulrich Obrist, Artistic Director of Serpentine. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Bettina. We are actually celebrating tonight the work, the legacy of Hervé Télémaque. We are incredibly grateful to all the poets, the artists, the thinkers who have participated in this program. And for those who want to know more, we have the catalog here of the Serpentine of Hervé Télémaque, designed by Jacques Kaiser, Hopscotch of the Mind, which is wonderful parallel reading to tonight's program. Since the late 50s, Hervé Télémaque has created a very complex, extraordinary body of work with a unique and also playful visual vocabulary featuring abstract gestures, cartoon-like imagery, and also mixed media compositions. Through paintings, drawings, and also collages, objects, assemblages, Télémaque combines historical and also literary references with those of consumer and also popular culture. Télémaque's compositions consistently draw connections between the movements of his internal thoughts and everyday experiences, bringing about striking collisions of image, text, and also material. Recurring through Télémaque's works is in a way the eternal return of meditations on his own life story, experiences of racism and colonialism, the psychological exploration of sexuality and desire, the presence of violence within the everyday life, and also contemporary politics and news media. As Hervé told us in a conversation, I'm going to quote him here, "I drew on my life as a Haitian of mixed race to construct a double language based on both the political and social, the question of identity, racism, and sexuality." End of quote. And today, in Double Language, the title of tonight's program, we bring together a new generation of artists who are concerned with these very same issues in their practice and who continue to permeate our everyday lives. Informed by and also associated with many writers, language was always central to Hervé Télémaque's practice. The artist wrote experimental texts and integrated words into his visual work throughout his career. He also had a practice as a writer, often wrote comments. An entire book was published on his collected writings, and we tried also for the catalogue here to translate for the first time some of these extraordinary artist writings into English. It's, I think, important to say that very often when artists write, it's an important medium for them, very often not enough recognized. So the focus on artist writing is really important, and Télémaque brought the writing also very often into his paintings, into his installations, as we could see and can see in the exhibition in London and in Aspen. With works often produced in critical dialogue with current events, Hervé's practice also explored and expressed the multiplicity of Caribbean and also diasporic identity by juxtaposing context and layering meanings. This resonated with what Hervé called the force of poetic synthesis, something he found in Creole language and also, of course, in a dialogue the work has with Edouard Glissant's writing and Glissant's concept of mondialité, which is so important for us here at the Serpentine. We invited Edouard here to London for a conversation with Linton Kwesi Johnson many years ago, and his thinking has really very much inspired our entire program. Tonight's program explores the relationship between literature and visual art. It takes inspiration from how Hervé's work drew on idioms, on multilingual experience in the Caribbean diaspora, and also, as said before, again and again and all over again, incorporated language, often also in his own handwriting, actually, into painting. Télémaque's unique visual vocabulary inflected his practice with a critical awareness of an evolving and also complex modern world. These evening's contributors have offered their own interpretations, not only in response to Hervé's work, but also to their own practices, which we also celebrate here in this program. So Hervé Télémaque, Double Language, begins with a deep dive look into the making of the Serpentine and Aspen Art Museum exhibitions by co-curator Joseph Constable, followed by a film poem by artist Julien Creuzet, who will represent France at the next Venice Biennale, followed by a reading of a new text by Marie-Célie Agnant. It then continues with a discussion between artists Janiva, Ellis and Adee Roberson, a new film by artist Manuel Mathieu, as well as a previously unseen conversation between myself and Hervé Télémaque, which we recorded last year in his Paris studio, and last but not least, a newly commissioned film by artist Manuel Arturo Abreu. I would also like to thank the Aspen Art Museum, above all Nicolas Lees and all the teams, and of course Joseph Constable, for this wonderful collaboration to make the Aspen exhibition happen after the show in London. We always say the Aspen Art Museum and the Serpentine is 1 + 1 = at least 11. Our thanks go also to Zach Group, Zach Keys, for designing our beautiful exhibition catalogue. As mentioned before, the catalogue includes writings by Hervé, but it's actually books within the book. There is also a book about studio drawings of Hervé. And of course the text. Academic C.C. McKee draws on their specialism in the art and visual culture of the modern Atlantic world in order to read Télémaque's work through a psychoanalytic lens, and the context of Haitian art, of course. Artist Helen Martin, who also designed and developed a display feature for the Aspen exhibition, and legendary writer Lionel Trujillo have composed thoughtful and poetic responses to Télémaque's work, suggesting new points of entry into the artist's oeuvre. Political scientist and historian Françoise Vergès, who has accompanied the trajectory of Hervé for so many years, and we actually recorded a last conversation with Françoise and Hervé in Paris just a few weeks before his passing in The extraordinary text Françoise uses the artist's recurring motif of the open mouth as a starting point for a meditation on Haitian history and also on the politics of anti-blackness, while art historian Sarah Wilson's text contextualizes Télémaque's practice within the wider European artistic scene. We would like to thank the amazing Serpentine Dream Team who has put today's program together: Hannah Gierma, Senior Editor, Curator of Editorial Projects, Fiona Glenn, Content Producer, Kostas Stasinopoulos, Associate Curator, Live Programs, Eva Specht, Curatorial Assistant, and Bea Redweg, Production Coordinator of this project. Above all, we are immensely grateful to the late Hervé Télémaque for the incredible work, the incredible collaboration, also for more than 30 years of dialogue. I met Hervé for the first time a few weeks after moving to Paris in the early 90s, when I started to work for the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, and Hervé and I were part of a wider jury of the Fonds National d'Art Contemporain at La Défense, and would meet every couple of months over years and got to know each other. This exhibition would not have been possible without the support and collaboration of Hervé's daughter, Elodie Anne Télémaque, whom we thank very, very much, and of course also Hervé's closest collaborator, Florence Halve-Brebel. Thank you all so much for joining tonight's program for Double Language, and please give now a very warm welcome to Joseph Constable, the co-curator of A Hopscotch of the Mind at the Serpentine and the Aspen Art Museum. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Sanjorik, and hello everyone. I'm really excited to be here to introduce and provide an insight into the making of Hervé Télémaque, A Hopscotch of the Mind at Serpentine and Aspen Art Museum. And I'd really like to start this introduction by acknowledging the late Hervé Télémaque, who I first met in 2020 online via Zoom in the midst of the pandemic as we started to plan for his upcoming exhibition at Serpentine. Due to ongoing travel restrictions, so many of these meetings took place online, with me in London, him in Paris, during which we would talk through his incredible archive of works, stretching from the late 1950s when he arrived in New York City from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, right through until the present moment, with pieces that he was working on as we continued to meet, essentially comprising around 70 years of making. Télémaque's work is notable for its expansive visual vocabulary, a wild and idiosyncratic ride through language and image expressed through a brilliant and unique mind, a double consciousness or double language that reaches across the realms of identity, sexuality, the political and the social. It's important to note that there is nothing lofty about Télémaque's genius, but rather a deep understanding of human nature that is explored with humbleness, playfulness, humor and joy, which is also an apt summation of Télémaque the man as well as Télémaque the artist. It was truly a privilege and highlight of my curatorial career so far to engage with his works through this exhibition. And I think the following quote sums up Télémaque's approach to his life and work rather well. And he explains that basically my painting is rooted in what I have lived, in anecdotes, little incidents that have happened to me. But my problem as a painter is how to move from that lived experience to pictures that can circulate, and to do so with my sole resources, the plane, the colors, the titles. They are not enormous resources, but they satisfy me. But they will have to do, to find a way of making my lived experience no longer directly personal, so that everyone can perceive its meaning. A Hopscotch of the Mind brings together works from the early 1960s until the present day, highlighting the enduring themes of Télémaque's work through his multifaceted practice. But rather than taking a chronological approach, Hans-Ulrich and I proposed through the exhibition a non-linear exploration of Télémaque's visual vocabulary, encouraging viewers to jump between media and periods and forming their own associations between the disparate narrative fragments. So this exhibition is very much an invitation. It's an invitation for viewers to carve out their own pathways through the artist's visual language, forming new associations both based on their own experiences and perceptions. Following its run at Serpentine, which was from October 2021 to January 2022, A Hopscotch of the Mind has taken on a new life in the Colorado Mountains at Aspen Art Museum, which is currently on view until the 26th of March 2023. And as part of this new iteration of the exhibition, we were able to expand the list of works, including never-before-seen pieces from the artist's studio in Paris. And we also invited artist Helen Martin to develop the exhibition design. And I'd really like to include an extra special mention here of the amazing vision and contribution that Helen brought to this process. Helen Martin's exhibition design references Télémaque's play between graphic authority and painterly playfulness. Structured around motifs of recognizable architecture, which fragment between the museum galleries, the viewing experience is one that moves in a process of construction and collapse. So we see familiar compositions: house, shed, window, tent, cubicle, which provide framing devices and contained environments, which then mirror visual moments of perspective and exposure in Télémaque's work. Following this sense of shifting viewpoints and narration within each of Télémaque's compositions, Martin's design is composed using multiple facets and cutaway apertures, windows, which allow for works to be seen in collective and sequence layers. Again, we are so grateful to Helen and her team for their work on this exhibition. On behalf of Nicola Lees, the Nancy and Bob Magoon director at Aspen Art Museum, there are a number of individuals and organisations without whom this exhibition would not have been possible. Aspen Art Museum exhibitions are made possible by the Marx Exhibition Fund, and leadership support for A Hopscotch of the Mind is provided by Susan and Larry Marx. General exhibition support is provided by the Toby Devon Lewis Visiting Artist Fund and the National Council. Admission to the Aspen Art Museum is free, courtesy of Amy and John Phelan. Last but not least, the Aspen Art Museum exhibition really would not have been possible without the amazing work of Simone Krug, Assistant Curator, and Kate Mara, Director of Exhibitions, along with the rest of the museum team. Thank you so much for joining Double Language today.
Trop d'air, trop tard, en apesanteur, en apesanteur. Trop d'air, trop tard, en apesanteur, en apesanteur. Présage, message de l'amigale palata. Nuage efface chaque trace de passage. Présage, message de l'amigale palata. Nuage efface chaque trace de passage, 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 passage. Nuage efface chaque trace de passage. Sia, l'autre Sia, l'autre Nuage efface chaque trace de passage. Sia, l'autre Sia, l'autre Nuage efface chaque trace de passage. Sia, l'autre j'ai rêvé de toi. Ma toutou, j'ai très longtemps rêvé de toi. Ma toutou, 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 ma toutou.
Et oui, c'est ça la vie.
Qui ça volatilise? Qui moun qui savent? Petite brise se méfie de l'église. Qui moun qui savent? Qui ça? Mais au fond, qui sait? Qui moun qui savent? Tous les secrets qui se matérialisent. Qui savent. Tu, mais qui es-tu? Tu, mais tu me tues. Tu, mais qui es-tu? Tu, mais tu me tues. Tu, mais tu me tues. Tu, mais tu me tues. Arc-en-ciel au loin recule, ventricule, aurore régule. Combien de solitude quand tu montes en altitude. Arc-en-ciel au loin recule, ventricule, aurore régule. Combien de solitude quand tu montes en altitude. Tu, mais tu me tues. Tu, mais tu me tues.
Hervé Télémaque, voir l'invisible. De pouvoir m'exprimer, même brièvement, sur l'œuvre de ce peintre unique qu'est Hervé Télémaque, se veut l'occasion inespérée de revivre cette rencontre fabuleuse avec ce que je nomme la découverte de l'identité créatrice. Une identité portée par un souffle si puissant de liberté qu'il nous atteint de manière presque physique. C'était au cours de l'année 2015. J'avais profité lors d'un bref séjour en France pour voir une exposition rétrospective de l'artiste au Musée national d'art moderne du Centre Pompidou. Je me rappelle avoir été totalement subjuguée, prise dans un tourbillon indescriptible, emportée par une vague créatrice que j'estimais d'une hardiesse incomparable. Je suis, me disais-je, non pas en présence d'une œuvre quelconque, mais d'un monument qui, à chaque pas, chaque étape, chaque geste et chaque mouvement, engendre son propre moule, sa propre forme, son propre statut, et qui se tient surtout à une distance infinie de tous les stéréotypes. Rapidement surgirent en moi tout un flot de questions sur la création littéraire, questions récurrentes que je me posais bien sûr à moi-même, puis je me mis littéralement à trotter d'un tableau à l'autre dans une sorte de ravissement, mêlé d'un vague sentiment d'intranquillité, comme pour me hâter avant que ne prenne fin ce qui pour moi n'était rien d'autre que de la magie. Il a fallu peu de temps pour que naisse en moi l'impression qu'émergeait dans l'ensemble quelque chose de moi, quelque chose d'une lointaine enfance, l'impression de découvrir une sorte de langage insoupçonné. Je me suis mise alors à essayer de décoder pour saisir le continuum narratif qui s'offrait à moi. De bien piètres mots, je l'avoue, tentaient de venir à ma rescousse: refus, libération, équilibre, ordonnance, assemblage, harmonie, synthèse, totalité, cohérence, fluidité, et leur écho rejoignait en moi ce dialogue auquel me conviaient les couleurs plus tranchantes les unes que les autres, alliées aux formes, à l'ironie, à un sens de l'humour inénarrable. D'un tableau à l'autre, le tourbillon s'intensifiait. Je me rappelle avoir pensé que le peintre avait sans aucun doute fait le choix d'être, tout simplement lui-même, dans toute son entièreté. Cette poétique à la fois recherchée et empreinte de ce caractère profondément primesautier m'exaltait. J'y décelais cette faculté de l'artiste de faire table rase des sollicitations reliées aux transes de l'acquis ainsi qu'aux impulsions liées à l'imaginaire. La trajectoire qu'il m'était donné d'explorer me ramenant en mémoire certains textes de Garcia Lorca, artiste à la poétique lucide, qui nous a laissé des textes irremplaçables, élaborés à partir de métaphores. J'empruntais cette passerelle pour suivre un chemin artistique qui me semblait réinventé à chaque pièce. Ce chemin était guidé par une voix qui scandait une ode à la liberté absolue de l'acte créateur. Passé ce moment où l'émotion et l'ébranlement rejoignent l'émerveillement, je consentis à m'ouvrir à une réflexion sur l'invisible. Dans toute son intensité, l'œuvre du peintre Télémaque se posait en moi. Je lui faisais une place aussi vaste que celle octroyée aux métaphores lorquiennes. Je repris mon parcours, plus apaisé cette seconde fois. Sur les toiles, des objets doucement respiraient. Un langage prenait corps sous mes yeux. Le dialogue avait lieu. Il naissait pour moi, en moi. Je voyais avec mon propre regard uniquement. Je voyais l'invisible.
I feel like when I think about like satire and symbolism, there's like the dialogue with making something in your studio and then the understanding of the landscape it's going to be received in and responding to. And I think when it comes, where I saw some parallels was that like there's a push and pull with the freeness that poetry can inhabit when you're by yourself or when you're speaking with people who see you, and the need to note and acknowledge how fraught the larger world is and how fraught the landscape is in relationship to how your work is framed. And, you know, Adee, you and I were talking briefly earlier about this, but like thinking about Black artists, but also like maybe particularly Black artists who also have white parents. There's like a push and pull with identity that feels like existential in a really particular way in relationship to art, because the environment is canonized in a way that just like ignores anything non-white unless it's being colonized. And I think just like the desire to find humor with communicating the trickiness of that, and the multidimensionality of like that violence as a material, it feels like a potent part of the overlap I see in my work and his work.
Yeah, and I feel that like on a level of thinking about even just being, you know, a Black person who was born in America, but maybe you're a descendant of people from other places. I mean, we both have ties to Jamaica and being Caribbean, and that there's even between us both and our experiences, there's distance in that, you know, based on who and our family members have migrated or how close we are to our families and how close we are in proximity to that island. So I thought about that a lot, and like how sometimes like the symbols like also come from this very intuitive place, or the colors come from this intuitive place. So I think I noticed that a lot with his work, and felt the connection to that as well, that experience of like, you know, being from a place, migrating to a different place, and the way that I feel like, you know, and this is not a generalization because so many people interact in different ways, but I feel like the way that Caribbean people connect to color, and the way that that's connected to like being a part of the African diaspora and like symbols, what I've noticed in intuitively with working with my practice with color, that I've seen like, you know, I might paint with this sort of neon color, and then I've seen it like in like clothing that's connected to like voodoo in Benin, or connected to like masquerade clothing in Nigeria and Igbo masquerades. And there's also, I feel like there's like an intuition that comes through color and through symbolism that even some of us like we're connected to it, but we don't necessarily even know what it's from until we realize that connection. And so I felt like I did see a lot of that in Hervé's work as well, and felt that energy in that.
Totally. Like it's less explicable. It's just like sensational, and like so much meaning can be embodied in those choices that like color feels like an emotive anchor that doesn't need any other, it's like a description in and of itself. So it's like doing a lot of that.
Yeah. And I feel like we talked about that around like as friends, around like emotions too, with like certain times you're painting certain things and maybe colors come out in this way that's emotional. Or like when we both looked at Mavis Pousse's like abstract paintings, and it happened to be, and she's Jamaican, and you know, we're both, you know, are descendants of people who are Jamaican or like have a connection to Jamaica but didn't grow up there. And we noticed that the blinds that were in this painting that she did, you happen to be painting this color blinds in your painting, and you had never heard of her work before. And so I feel like those kinds of things, like the magic around that, and like the spirit around that and the energy around that, like comes up a lot, you know, for people like us.
Yeah, it's like the feeling part. It's like the part that's not being contained by description or deciphering. It's just like the feeling connection. Like I feel really connected to you, and I feel connected to your work in a way that is just since a sensory feeling and an emotional feeling, and that feels really potent, and that does feel you know, really linked to conversations around Caribbeanness and Blackness and communication that is inherited in a way that's not about study or comparison, but about just dialing in and like sinking in. And I see that, like, I feel like looking at Hervé's work, I was like, oh, because I learned about his work pretty recently, and I was like, oh, this was here, this has been here. I didn't even learn about any of this. And there have been a number of Black artists who that's happened with recently, where I didn't learn about these things in school, but I just see such a link in a way, I'm thankful to have come into contact with it maybe later, in terms of just whatever, my own spiral. But I also feel really, it feels like a shame to not have like been informed by some of these things, because who knows what that produces. So it does feel kind of like like an unspoken dialogue, that when you do touch hands with it, you're like, oh, of course,
Yeah.
of this conversation, like that is our technology, that is how the sharing happens. And it feels so funny to do that sharing in a space that's really about like ownership and like colonizing ideas and mapping and like just like containment. Everything.
And even the timing, like, you know, there are so many people that I've just recently found out about that I see so much of a reflection and feel a connection with their work, who are older, you know, who've passed, and like, or who, you know, are just like in a whole different country or different place. So I want to ask you too, like, what about like technically when you look at like Hervé's work, do you feel like, because I do see like the connections with you guys with some of like the cartoon things, with the characters in the work, like is there like a painting like style or technical way that you kind of like also like feel a connection to that?
Yeah, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I was like surprised to see something that felt like reflected back at me. And when I was reading the interview that he had done with Hans, I feel like maybe, I feel like there's a connection with immediacy. Like the reason I started incorporating cartoons was to maybe like evacuate myself of a responsibility to depict something, and also to just learn how to draw and have like a quickness and an immediacy with something that already existed. And I can't speak to these motivations. I feel like like a lot of the cartooning happening here is like in such close relationship to the initiation of pop art, but like there's that happening in a very cheeky and overt way. And I feel like there's a parallel with using stock cartoon and then an invention of cartoon in relationship to one another. That nuance has like a tension that really speaks to the way that Hervé is communicating like a critique of whiteness, basically. It's like a communication of navigating as a Black person. Speaking about cartooning and the ways that I see an overlap in my approach to cartooning and Hervé's approach is the use of like cartoons as like a ready-made image, and the use of cartooning as a style to use in an angular way, like to be descriptive with when something is drawn in a cartoonish way versus in another way, and how that interacts with a ready-made cartoon or a ready-made comic. And I think at the time that Hervé was doing that is in a more direct conversation with pop art. And the way that I had approached doing it was kind of just to evacuate myself of, it's like almost like a reference. It's like something is so steeped in a reference that it is meaningless or something. When something's so ubiquitous, it's like, it means nothing, it means everything. And I think when I started doing that, it was to alleviate myself of having to create meaning and just be able to learn how to draw. And that led into a confidence with drawing my own things and then figuring out what the dialogue was between these images that were ubiquitous and the ones I was trying to carve out for myself. And that also feels like an ability to have a dialogue between, I don't know, like a structural dialogue about like what is here, what's being invented, what's being said, what's overstated, and what's unstated.
About like the tension part too, I feel like that's something that comes up a lot, maybe that I see in like his work and in your work. There is this tension around like, yeah, these like cartoons, these images that are created, there's these things that was, and there's these like tension that I don't even think that you are doing, but like that people even perceiving things, you know, in that way. Like, and I guess that's in a way how like satire and those things work. But like, it's just like you were talking about like how there's that tension between this thing and then this thing you create and this thing that you kind of draw from, and thinking a lot about like how that connects to race and a dialogue around, you know, people's perceptions of race and people's perceptions of what even, you know, as the painters or the people creating it, like what you're even trying to put through in that. And I really appreciated how you said, you know, it's everything and it's nothing. And there is something in that, but then people can kind of perceive it as one thing, but in everything and there's nothing, there is the talking about the race, there is talking about like colonization and perceptions around that, but it's also not. So I don't know, I really like, I feel like... I mean,
like codes, you know, like symbolism can function as codes and can function as a hidden dialogue, as well as something that, which, you know, symbolism often is. And I think when it functions in a canonized context, it's about who is educated and can align with these understandings versus, you know, maybe one that's about experience, not through a hierarchy, but through a base level of connectedness. Mm-hmm. And I think that creates a new base for implication, because so much of like art and context like relies on implication to like feel like you've understood, you know, what's there. I feel like a base of implication for experience is a different way to think about symbolism, and like one that feels, it extends in a different way. So what's being said and what's not being said resonates differently for different people. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself creates a tension when you're trying to decipher a work and enjoy something or understand what value it has to you or why you're looking at it. And sometimes like in my work, I feel like people are like, this is really chaotic and intense. And I'm like, it's really not. This part's very intense and being perceived as a very like simple gesture. And a lot of the gestures kind of get inverted when they're being looked at or perceived in like a more formal art space that's like relying on like white existential canon. And I feel like it's fun to have that playfulness that just feels kind of insulated by Black perspective.
Exactly. It's like, it's so like, and it's like, you can just feel, I mean, the difference, but even how people respond to the work, you know, in certain spaces where it is about the white gaze, it's like this whole didactic thing, and it's created these scenarios that necessarily like neither one of us have probably put into the work. And I'll feel like just a person who's not in any sort of art world, or just like a person who's just like a just human being existing, or a family member I've experienced that a lot with, who see the work and they're like, oh, I can see this in it. And that means that. And it just feels so like it comes with such ease and simplicity. And you're like, yeah, that is like what it is. And that, I love that, like, you know, critique from, or my niece who's like 2, Ozzy, you know, Ozzy, like the other day, she saw one of my paintings, like a bigger painting, and she was like, it's like a playground. And I was like, wow, that's like the best critique I had from a 2-year-old. She was like, it's like a playground. She's like, I love it, Auntie Adee. I was like, thank you.
Yeah, Adee, I was wondering how, you know, you thought about symbolism in your work, looking at Hervé's work and how some of those connections were coming up for you.
Yeah, I guess when I saw his work and I saw like these various like shapes that were like made up shapes, I definitely felt like a connection to that, when a shape isn't like a perfect circle or a square or a rectangle, but it's like this other like shape that you create, and what those mean, these like moments, these forms that we kind of create, and how those are like, they're 2D, but they're also kind of sculptural, and they exist in this like space. I think as far as my practice, that it's so much like about intuition And I don't know what the symbols or shapes are going to be until I just start making them, and then I connect them and they kind of all like connect to each other to like a larger thing. But I definitely feel like they're around like spirituality and around nature, and how like nature kind of just, it's all like connected.
Also,
And
like with like some of the sound projects you do, there's like a lot of like collaging. Like when I think about like sound and video and the way that those things feel like they're in relationship to your paintings and your prints, a lot of that is like layers and kind of not like some stable ground, but a lot of weaving in and out.
yeah, no, it's true. With like the music stuff too, I just feel like it's all, because like a lot of the music is more like ambient or more experimental, or like even the performances are more of like kind of creating of this own world that like I think a lot of us have to create if we're, you know, we're not connected to the place where we were born or where we're from or we're a descendant of. We kind of live in like creating these worlds. And so I feel like all of those parts of my practice like come together to create this like bigger like world that it's you know, it's everything and it's nothing, and it's also like just a part of being in conversation with the larger diaspora, and being able to connect through really like I feel like my practice is like a lot about relationships, really honestly, and like and somatic things and like the body and how color and sound and form and all of these things are ways to transmute trauma into healing, and using those things to kind of just like move my own energy in my own life and to like transmute things of my own experiences. So, and the just experience of being a Black person in this world, and how to just like, yeah, move that energy and make it like generative.
Yeah, creating like dimensions to like feel through those things, those sensations.
Yeah.
テクニックを用いる前にね、人間の魂の問題が霊の問題、命の問題があるわけですよ。そういうものをね、例えば踊りを作るときにね、そういうものをね、いつの間にかその用いて踊りをやると。そしていつの間にかその肝心なことがなくなっちまって、そしてテクニックだけが先行していくような踊りってさ、なぜ何のためにそんなことをやるのか。我々はテクニックで生きてるわけじゃないし、むしろテクニックはね、使えば使うほど大事なものは蓋されて、大事なものがどっか脱落していくということについてやっぱり体験してますからね。死んでからもテクニック構成で生きていくわけじゃないから、死んでいくわけじゃないから、私はテクニック構成になっていく。そういうものを押しのけてね、そしてひたすら魂の願いのようなものを、私の考えじゃ人間が人間の中から生み出されるように、生み出されるものが私は作品だと思っておるので。
After we have eaten our innocence, naivety, and vulnerability, we explode into 1,000 pieces. The picture is painted with blood. Pillow, window shallow. Sucking life from my first soulmate. Invisible to my own presence, solely a witness of my sobriety. Bridges on bridges. Digging into my slippery soul, searching for where to draw the line. The pendulum swings new paths and cracks the horizon. Expansion of a world of speculations and desires. I exchange it all for a mirage of myself. The salty taste of despair clashes with the thirst of my spirit. And this fragility echoes in the perilous abyss of abandonment. The scabs crumble to ashes, liminal. After we have eaten our dignity, pride and certainty, we explode into 100,000 pieces. The picture is painted with cum, oblivious, searching for gold on the moon. New forms of apparition embrace me. Molding my ethos formless blurs the weight of the past. Brick by brick, I become the king of invisible territories, running from one castle to another, trapped on a land, a minefield of false certainties, blinded by the light of time. I explore the possibilities within my condition, to then slowly land with burned wings, gazing through the firmament. Comatose. After we have eaten our fragility, humanity, and empathy, we explode into 1,000,000 pieces. The picture is painted with feces. The song I'm singing resonates miles away and fragments the ground to leave craters as deep as oceans. As my projections fall into these craters, my face gets covered in dust. On the windows of my sanctuary, the condensation helps me trace my favorite flowers. With the light of the sun rising, I sit down and watch them disappear forever.
J'ai choisi de plutôt faire connaître un peu le grand poète haïtien qui s'appelle Jacques Roumain, qui était un agronome diplomate, mais de l'aristocratie haïtienne, qui a été même le fondateur du Parti communiste haïtien. Je vais essayer de te lire un petit poème amusant, léger, pas du tout dans la tradition de la poésie engagée, typique de la Caraïbe. Et là, c'est plutôt un petit poème de légèreté, qui s'appelle 100 mètres, et qui est dédié à un sportif qui s'appelle Silvio Cator, champion. Et je vais te lire ce petit poème qui est très enjoué, comme on dit. Alors voilà, 100 mètres, c'est le titre. 4, ramassés comme des fauves, 4 hommes, les énergies bandées telles des cordes, se sentent fluidiques, se heurtent, forte d'embrocation, nerveusement se froisse. Angoisse de l'attente, invocation, starter, au starter, tire, délivre, nous, prêts. Bras, Ellis brusquement, déclenché par le pistolet, tournant éperdument en quart de cercle, 20 mètres. Tous de front, bien-être, volupté du vent, entre les dents, volupté du vent entre les dents, 50 mètres, 2 lâche-pieds. Hache, l'air, bûcheron, de la fatigue qui colle, les muscles au sol, désespoir, les 2 autres de front. Voilà, c'est un petit poème qui est tout à fait opposé à la tradition engagée de la peinture haïtienne et de la peinture de gauche, Caraïbes, etc. C'était un homme, comme j'ai dit, il était agronome, il était diplomate et aristocrate.
Tu pourrais peut-être...
Tu veux que j'en lise un autre?
Un deuxième, oui, je pense.
Eh bien, l'autre, c'est les plus sérieux. Il concerne d'ailleurs quelque chose que tu connais, à savoir le concept de mot guiné. Le mot guiné qui, en haïtien, en créole haïtien, signifie mort. Alors, le poème s'appelle Guinée. c'est le lent chemin de Guinée. La mort y conduira. Voici les branchages, les arbres, la forêt. Écoute le bruit du vent dans ses longs cheveux, d'éternelle nuit. C'est le lent chemin de Guinée. Tes pères t'attendent sans impatience. Sur la route, ils palavrent, ils attendent. Voici l'heure où les ruisseaux grelottent comme des chapelets d'os. C'est le lent chemin de Guinée. Il ne sera pas fait de lumineux accueil au noir pays des hommes noirs, sous un ciel fumeux, bercé de cris d'oiseaux. Autour de l'œil du marigot, le marigot les cils des arbres s'écartent sur la clarté pourrissante. Là t'attend, au bord de l'eau, un paisible village et la case de tes pères et la dure pierre familiale, où reposait enfin ton front. Voilà. Ça, c'est plus sérieux, mais comme je te l'ai déjà dit, le retour en Guinée, allant Guinée, en créole, dit-on, c'est à la fois la mort, mais aussi le plaisir. Voilà.
Tu étais venu d'une famille d'artistes. L'oncle était un poète très connu, il s'appelait Karl Brouwer, mais tu as quitté en fait Haïti assez tôt et tu es arrivé à New York en 1957. Donc, je voulais savoir si tu pouvais me parler un peu de ce moment-là, parce que c'était évidemment le moment où l'expressionnisme abstrait régnait. Oui, donc commençons peut-être par ça.
Bon, il faut comprendre que je peignais à Port-au-Prince un peu et sous l'influence du cubisme analytique, c'est-à-dire Georges Braque et M. Picasso, et que donc je décide à un moment donné, je vais aller apprendre la décoration ou le design. Évidemment, c'est la version que je soumettais à mon père médecin, qui était un homme rationnel et tout à fait classique. Et là, je lui ai raconté un bobard et j'ai été m'inscrire à une école d'art qui s'appelait l'Art Students League à l'époque. Et voilà, et c'était une très bonne initiative et je me suis révélé progressivement passionné par l'art grâce aux nombreux musées de New York. C'est pas nécessaire que je les mentionne tous, et aussi toutes les galeries new-yorkaises où régnait à l'époque l'expressionnisme abstrait, dans toute sa splendeur. Je découvrais que le tableau pouvait être un champ d'initiative violente ou libre, ce qui était tout à fait contraire au cubisme analytique que j'admirais dans les petits livres que j'achetais à Port-au-Prince. Très vite, je vois toutes les belles expositions de Kooning, de Rothko, de Pollock et autres, mais que je vais découvrir progressivement les limites, au bout de 3 ans quand même, au bout de 3 ans, les limites de cette gesticulation libre qui se voulait, dans la tradition, je peux le dire, du surréalisme de l'époque, à savoir découvrir un peu, grosso modo, dans la grande ambition du surréalisme, c'est les mécanismes de la pensée et de la liberté gestuelle et autres. Et donc, je vais donc apprendre, j'ai beaucoup regardé tout ce monde qui dominait malheureusement la totalité de la scène new-yorkaise. Et donc, on peut dire que l'expressionnisme abstrait était une sorte d'académisme généralisé, mais qui a été pour moi très stimulant et instructif, mais qui laissait en moi un manque à savoir qu'est-ce que moi, Hervé Télémaque, j'ai à raconter dans cette histoire. Et donc, mon travail a commencé à être plus narratif, plus tentative de narration, à savoir sexuelle, politique et autres. Et donc, qui ont été par la suite le fondement de mon travail. Les mots sont arrivés très vite, dès 1958, dans ma peinture. Et ça va être une constance que l'on retrouve dans la totalité de ma carrière. Parce qu'au fond, le signe du mot n'est pas loin du signe de l'image. Et donc c'était naturel de les associer ensemble.
C'est le paradis, et comme tu m'as dit aussi, c'est le retour à l'Afrique. Et ce qui est intéressant, en fait, c'est que c'est aussi le titre du plus grand tableau dans l'exposition à la Serpentine. C'est le seul titre en créole. Est-ce que tu pourrais nous parler un tout petit peu de ce tableau et de créole?
Ce type de tableau, quand j'accroche la toile de 2 mètres par 10 sur un mur, ça invite à toutes les improvisations. Ça offre une grande liberté sur laquelle je me suis reposé pour décrire différentes formes, différents objets, à savoir par exemple le lac de sel en Amérique, la bouche de Menré. Il y a plein de citations successives dans ce tableau. Et librement approché, ce type d'espace invite à une composition libre et narrative et numérative. Pour terminer par un baril d'essence, et tout est dit, mais légèrement. Cette mort de Guinée, en Guinée, est une mort légère, sans dramatisation. Et je tiens à indiquer combien le fait d'être un Caraïbe, d'être un Haïtien, de venir de ce bassin compliqué qui s'appelle le bassin Caraïbe, n'est pas seulement un lieu de l'open prolétariat souffrant le martyre, comme on l'imagine facilement quand on vit de l'Occident riche, mais aussi un lieu de plaisir, de joie, d'une nature exubérante, capable d'évoquer la gaieté et le plaisir.
Il y avait chez toi toujours, depuis le début d'ailleurs, déjà à New York, un désir narratif.
Oui, c'est exact.
Tu me disais qu'il y avait un fort désir de fiction, un désir de narration, qui tu es, d'où tu viens. Et j'étais la semaine dernière en conversation avec Edwige d'Anticat, l'écrivain basé à Miami, qui en fait vient de Haïti. Et elle m'a dit que quelque chose qui est très fort, c'est en fait les histoires qu'on n'oublie jamais, c'est les histoires qu'on connaît de son enfance. Et donc j'étais curieux si tu pouvais parler un peu de ce désir narratif et à quel point c'est connecté à Haïti, comme disait Edwige.
Bon, être haïtien, ce n'est pas une petite affaire, hein. On vient d'une histoire lourde, il ne faut pas oublier, Saint-Domingue, c'était le nom ancien d'Haïti, était un lieu important dans la colonisation française. C'était la grande colonie française de l'époque, riche pour le café, le coton, le sucre, et que donc nous avons l'habitude de faire appel à l'histoire pour nous définir. Nous sommes naturellement à la fois deux choses, à la fois ouverts au surréalisme, hein, d'ailleurs il ne faut pas oublier le passage de Breton à Haïti, par exemple, qui a eu une petite influence, et aussi cette capacité de vouloir se raconter. On est des Noirs, qu'on a débarqué un jour à Saint-Domingue, qui devait s'occuper d'enrichir les plantations, et que là, il y a naturellement un besoin de se retrouver, de savoir qui on est, d'où l'on vient, et pourquoi, et le pourquoi. Et donc, à côté de la ville de Miami, qui est tout près, raciste, fermée, et qu'il faut à tout Haïtien la nécessité de se définir et de se redéfinir. Et que pour nous, c'est au fond un passage naturel vers la narration.
Il y a une œuvre qu'on a dans l'exposition à la Serpentine et qui circulera après au musée de Aspen, qui est fondamentale. C'est cette œuvre qui appartient à la collection du Centre Georges Pompidou, qui s'appelle My Darling Clementine. Et en fait, d'une certaine façon, beaucoup des préoccupations, des choses que tu viens de décrire, se réunissent dans ce tableau, puisque c'est un autoportrait.
Sous forme de cow-boy. Oui. Et je dois préciser, cette idée de faire un cow-boy noir m'est venu tout seul. Et paraît-il, ça s'est beaucoup développé par la suite aux États-Unis, qu'il y a eu une allégorie comme ça des cow-boys noirs. Mais en fait, moi, je l'ai découvert réellement tout seul. Je me suis dit, pourquoi pas faire un cow-boy noir? Et c'est ce que j'ai voulu faire. Mais en relation quand même directement avec la France, par exemple, les problèmes des cheveux crépus qui sont soignés par des produits très sophistiqués. La petite poupée avec une banane, c'est fait en France. Ce que j'ai voulu montrer, c'est que j'ai retrouvé en France, au fond, la même figuration négative qui existait aux États-Unis, qui est semblable au fond, mais à un degré moindre. Et que j'en ai fait la source de mon travail à ce moment-là, puisque j'habitais la France à ce moment-là.
C'est aussi le moment où tu as peint, en fait, My Darling Clementine. Oui. Comme tu dis, c'est un personnage entre élégant et réservé. Tu dis que c'est un pirate, un bacchant, un démon du carnaval haïtien. Mais tu dis c'est aussi le moment, en fait, non seulement où il y a un tournant vers le pop, mais aussi tu te rends compte que le surréalisme n'est plus la modernité, d'une certaine façon, puisqu'il y a des nouveaux expériments avec le roman. Il y a aussi la nouvelle vague dans le cinéma.
Il manque la lisibilité de figure que le surréalisme n'a pas. Il est engoncé dans des choses anciennes, à savoir l'automatisme qui est proche de l'abstraction, et qu'il manque la force de l'image. Et que le pop art français, à l'époque, va m'apporter une sorte de clarté, une manière de nommer plus facilement les choses. C'est la force du pop, hein, et de la méthode pop, c'est l'utilisation du déjà fait, du déjà connu, pour aller vers un ailleurs plus explicite.
Tu es allé à la fin des années 60, aux alentours de 68, vers 2 dimensions et demie. Souvent, il y a des objets. Et d'ailleurs, on a beaucoup parlé de ça avec Helen Martin, jeune artiste anglaise qui a écrit pour le catalogue de Londres, sur cette idée qui l'intéresse, que tu as des objets attachés au tableau, et souvent après, les objets migrent vers l'espace. Est-ce que tu pourrais parler un peu de ça?
On pourrait parler de l'influence du combine que j'ai perçu chez Robert Rosenberg à l'époque, hein, qui a été un très bon stimulant. Parce que, au fond, ce qui se produit à l'époque, c'est que nous, artistes, on découvre les possibilités multiples du langage. La capacité d'employer un mot, la capacité d'employer un objet en relief, éventuellement un objet de l'extérieur, et que c'est un signe comme un signe peint. C'est au fond l'élargissement du discours pour être le plus efficace possible. Il ne faut pas oublier que j'ai longtemps hésité, au début de mes premiers choix pour aller à l'école de la Sonslick, j'ai longtemps hésité à savoir si je voulais aller vers le cinéma plutôt. Et donc, mon intérêt pour le combine, enfin pour l'objet ajouté à la peinture peinte, hein, à l'image peinte, que cet enrichissement, au fond, est proche du cinéma. On passe d'une chose à l'autre rapidement, mais on peut passer d'une image à une représentation en relief, enfin en 3 dimensions, et que c'est en plus que l'on ajoute à ce fameux tableau qui n'est qu'un élément de plus, à savoir fait de toile, de pinceau, de peinture, et que on ne fait qu'ajouter un objet à un autre objet pour parler plus fort. C'est ça l'objectif. C'est la grande leçon du pop, c'est comment parler plus fort après la perte de sens de l'expressionnisme abstrait.
Magnifique.
Voilà.
En parlant des tableaux, et qu'on en a parlé un peu de la façon dont tu travailles, non de ta méthodologie. On en a parlé de ta méthodologie de travail.
Personnelle, oui.
Oui, tu m'as une fois dit que c'est un peu comme un moulin. Et j'étais curieux de cette image du moulin.
Comme un moulin à parole. Ouais. Là, ce serait un moulin à image. On peut se tromper quand on emploie tel mauvais mot ou mauvaise image, mais on peut revenir à nouveau sur le problème et additionner et corriger le réel. C'est ça. Au fond, le tableau a un intérêt de l'image, c'est qu'il peut corriger l'état de perception du monde. Et que c'est pas si mal que ça. C'est pour ça que ça mérite encore la peine de peindre. C'est dans la correction du réel et le rendre plus payant pour le spectateur et pour l'artiste lui-même.
Et c'est pour cette raison que tu continues toujours à peindre. Quels sont les projets non réalisés qui te restent à réaliser?
C'est le grand intérêt de l'art, c'est tout ce qui est potentiel et qui reste problématique, et de sens. Il faut aller vers un sens nouveau, tout le temps, le plus possible, quitte à se casser la figure, à ne pas pouvoir aller plus loin et de s'arrêter. Rien n'est plus beau que l'inachevé.
A Haitian revolutionary soldier, Montas or Montes perhaps, resurrects in modern Little Haiti, Brooklyn. In a museum, she finds pieces of her ancestors. From within the vitrine prison, an ancestor guides her to a French Renaissance-era painting. She jumps in. From inside it, she works a deeper power. She sees other pieces linked to the one she's in, The Cosmic Nexus of Toussaint in New York City by Hervé Télémaque, 1959. She taps into its raw scope of line, scale, form, color, to breach the thin canvas or veil or sail between material and immaterial realms. And so Toussaint Louverture suddenly arrives in de facto homo economicus, segregated, abstract expressionist Robert Moses' dreamscape-era New York. He conquers his bewilderment, starts planning after having learned from his own tragic mistakes, which led him to his death via Napoleon's sham treaty invite straight to a prison cell in the Ural Mountains. This time, he thinks, heed Dessalines' lion spirit. The numerous victories of the U.S. civil rights movement and the Black Arts era drew on Toussaint's new stateside presence. But our Haitian soldier has more to do. When Toussaint arrived, Hervé Télémaque was already fleeing a hypermarketized New York City landscape for the sunset post-surrealist dream of 1960s Paris. Here he drew on pop and mass art, Roget's line work, assemblage, an anomic pictorial language, narrative figuration, lean sculptures, sculptumig, the sense of power awaiting activation, but also the sense, as Télémaque himself wryly notes in a recent interview, that painters make some of their worst work in their old age. Perhaps elder status reframes youth. One sees oneself as a mask, only recognizable from a huge distance, a distance nevertheless very close to oneself. The mask has the nerve to talk back, and be petty about all one's failures, and in this way, insufferable in the loss it encompasses. Yet the drive lacks the art. Yet the lack drives the art. Future ancestor Télémaque faces his mask in the new strength of age, the strength of closeness to the veil, and says, I am a stranger to you, our breach and struggle, mutual, nervous, masked dance, which cuts me deep, and even causes me to loathe you, loathe the future and death, has shown me the stranger in myself, the sweetest witness, the one who is of the future, and so can't ever reject the future. You see? He witnesses the unborn and the unchained dead in me, let loose by time's book. So in this way, you, the mask of me, showed me the nurse miracle of innermost address, the capacity to write or paint my life and self into innermost existence. So I am a stranger to you, to myself. In unsaid and unthought ways, our Montas or Montes helps Télémaque gain the strength to say this to his mask, the mask of age. In so doing, Télémaque resonates enough to awaken from across the drumskin of time the voice of Guyanese writer of quantum fiction, Wilson Harris, in the lineaments of the pictorial frame, who remarks, I too was told I flew the coop, that I fled the reality of Guyana for the dream of England, to pursue this pipe dream of being a Caribbean who makes a living off their art, to keep alive the eternal flame of the imagination. Télémaque, my lad, if Paris became your base of operations, then that's just how it happened. The bravery of forging one's path and ignoring the tides of fashion is a task of timeless value. And the Caribbean human reaches all corners, you know. There are contours of hidden voyage written in us, roots of ancestral migration. You see, apparently fathers sent their children away, or perhaps the kids had to go far to love them properly. You're a painter, you know about distance and perspective. A covenant of migration is written into many a Haitian and Dominican poem. The Antillean peopling sequence involved conflicts and syncretisms of diverse groups to form the basis for the indigenous cultures eventually encountered by Columbus's Christ-drunk boats. Frontiers existed between Guanahatabey, Taino, Iyeri, and Calina through the island chain. A modern language like Garifuna, the last living island Arawak language, with much vocabulary from the Carib settlers who warred with the Taino, evidences the syncretism at play between these diverse peoples long before European colonization. My Guyanese colleague, Ivan Van Sertima, also worked deeply on the question of pre-Columbian contact between Amerindians and Africans. The Taino, for example, highly valued guanine, a South American alloy of copper, gold, and silver, whose name is suspiciously close to Guinea, the Creole term for both Africa and the immaterial or spiritual realm. Archaeologist Samuel Wilson considers the motives for these initial migrations. The Caribbean may well be the last uninhabited place settled by First Peoples, if we take Irving Rouse's 6000 BC, or something around there, as the start date. Seen from this light, the Caribbean, this zone of catalysis for global modernity, is also a kind of swan song for a different, older story. The last place reached by First Peoples. The first place reached by missionaries in their sick gold lusts. A painterly cosmic nexus in world theater. But I digress, dear Télémaque. Roused by the impromptu lecture, yet somewhat suspicious, Télémaque recognizes the vague contours and catalysts of these possible dreamscapes. He recalls Harris's final novel, The Ghost of Memory, where a man is mistaken for a terrorist and shot to death, but the bullet lets him step into a painting and work from within it. Télémaque remembers the eager young student of her own genealogy, a distant relative of the important Haitian journalist Michel Montas, and former Dominican politician Themistocles Montas, who recounted these mixed ancestors' attempts to pass for white under the Ancien Regime. Is she the dream soldier who appeared to him, who ferried Toussaint to NYC from within Télémaque's painting, and conveyed Hervé himself to Paris? What was her mission? Into the kitchen sink of the mind it all goes. Does the soldier refuse to speak, choosing instead to witness and act from within the magic of a picture frame? Time in the shape of memory must have something to do with this camouflage, this opportunity Hervé Télémaque is given for scrying a visual surface. A vague muscle in him clenches subtly, and at that moment our soldier appears to him veiled in a throbbing fog of scribbles, whispering, "The battered cowboy wants to heal." A mouth whose tongue is a tombstone gobbles up both image and phrase, but before it can spit out a gnarled mass, the soldier takes a cane and shoves it down the floating lips into an invisible throat. Choking, the throat starts to speak, but the silent words seem to come out of Télémaque's own mouth. Finally it vomits out the cane, now glowing white-hot, as well as a pair of underwear that drift upward like a sail to heaven. "This cane is for you," Montes says, handing it to Télémaque, as she steps out of the painting to head home.